Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and after 6 months of waiting, the time is finally here. It is IndyCar race week, everybody, as IndyCar heads to the street of St. Petersburg to kick off round 1 of 18 for the 2026 season, and I can't quite believe we're at this moment, Archie. It feels like we've been waiting for ages and ages and ages. The weekly episodes are still being churned out, but it never quite felt like we were getting closer, and all of a sudden, race week has crept up on us, and I can't wait to get back racing again this weekend.
Yeah, it's mad, really. I don't know how a 6-month off season can feel like it's actually gone semi-quickly. I mean, it is when you kind of think back to Nashville, like it does feel like an awful long time ago. But I don't know. I think the off season somehow ends up getting broken up because you kind of have Christmas in the middle of it, and that's kind of a halfway point. I honestly don't know how it feels like it's gone so quickly, but nonetheless, I'm delighted that we're here, and it's a very intense start as well with 4 races in 5 weeks, and we're off to a flying start, which is a nice change.
Yeah, it's not quite previous seasons where we'd get to St. Petersburg and then realise we've got one race in 7 weeks and work out, oh my goodness, what are we going to do for the other 6 weeks of content? But no such problems this year. We have 4 races in 5 weeks to kick off the season. April is a little bit slower, but it's all about building momentum at the start of the season, which is very good to have. And if you haven't listened to the show for the off-season, there are plenty of interview episodes to catch up on. Just to give you some of the names you've had on: Lockie Hughes, Louis Foster multiple times, Will Buxton, Townsend Bell, Christian Lundgaard, Sebastian Murray, Dennis Haugen, Max Taylor, Tom Gaymore, David Malukas, James Hinchcliffe, Louis Foster again. So there's a whole bunch of guests varying in all different forms of the IndyCar ladder and experience and insight. So definitely worth a listen, but you're stuck with us this week, and for good reason, because it is time to preview the 2026 season. Now, I know many of you will be wondering, hang on, Dan and Archie, where was your predictions episode? This was one of the favourite predictions episodes of your year last year, so where on earth is it? Well, don't worry, it's going to be coming out later this week. Our good friend James Scott has been in Milan covering the Olympics, and it'd be rude not to have him back on because he is a defending champion. So he's got a crown to hold, and be unfair if he can't claim back his title by us not letting him on because we needed the episode earlier. So it's coming later this week. Don't worry, we love our predictions episode and we're very much looking forward to that. And if you didn't catch it yesterday, we did have an extra episode with HMD Motorsports team boss Mike Marini. That's definitely worth listening to. Now along a really good insight, which I don't think you'll get anywhere elsewhere. But let's crack on with our preview. We've got 10 teams to go through this year, not the 11 we had last year because of the absence of Prema, as we've just discussed previously, but 10 teams to go through. We're going to just kind of go through the expectations of each team this season, what to look out for, recap the drivers, and we have some news to catch up on this week, and there are some press conference quotes at the end, which is very, very good from several drivers that we spoke to at the Phoenix test last week. But let's get started with Chip Ganassi Racing, the team that ultimately everybody is chasing, with the defending IndyCar champion at Indianapolis 500 winner Álex Palou. We have spoken at great lengths during this off-season about how mighty Álex Palou's 2025 season was, and ultimately it was a benchmark which nobody even got close to. And I think the big question from the Álex Palou perspective is, what could he do to get even better this season?
Yeah, I think obviously Palou goes into the season as favourite, obviously, because he's won the last 3 titles and he's coming off one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen. Like nobody's really had the answer, and I kind of think that's what makes this season so interesting, is that kind of chase of the rest of the field trying to chase down what is unquestionably now one of the all-time great driver-team combinations. Like 5 years with Ganassi, 4 titles. The only year he didn't win a title was because of all the contractual disputes that were going on off track. He now seems to feel as liberated as ever now that all of the legal disputes are over heading into the season. But yeah, I think it genuinely makes for a really enticing storyline, knowing that we go into the season with this modern great being chased. And I mean, I think it's also fascinating to see what Palou does this year, because even he acknowledges that this is really going to be really hard to repeat, because last year was so unprecedented, really. But I feel like we've said before, like, Palou, how can he really get better? And somehow he still manages to elevate himself. I feel like this time around, there's finally a case for saying all of his weaknesses, and take weaknesses with a pinch of salt, have been eliminated. But yeah, he surprised us before and broken new ground again. So remains to be seen, but it was so cool last year seeing the history being made. So I think could be just as cool this year. They're having that narrative of the chasers.
Yeah, ultimately, it's kind of difficult to put expectations for Palou compared to any other driver, because the expectation is he easily wins the championship because he has done in such dominant fashion the previous seasons. But what is the benchmark he sets in comparison to previous seasons? That's the biggest question mark on Palou's side. Can he go above and beyond what he did last year? Was it a combination of factors that meant he just had this amazing success last year? And as you say, who is going to be the one who hunts it down? It's hard to pick out a particular person you think has got Palou nailed down. As Tom Gainwell said to us the other week, we had all these drivers on content day and nobody seemed to quite have the answer to who would crack Palou this season. So that's going to be one of the big question marks. To start the season off so superbly last year, even as broken down as it was, he won, 5 of the first 6 races. I think from his perspective, it's going to be very important to do that again. Get a quick start to the championship and really build a lead as we go into the summer where it gets very, very busy again. So big starts the year for Palou. And obviously, come month of May, he's got an Indianapolis 500 crown to defend as well.
Yeah, I think that's the big key really for the rest of the field, is denying Palou getting off to this lightning start. Because, I mean, last year it felt like, even, I guess, by the Indy 500, he had a lead of, 100 points. And it kind of felt done at that point, which was wild, really. So I guess for the spectacle, I think the rest of the field needs to just combat that super, super strong start. And yeah, obviously going to be interesting this year, but it being such a fast-paced start rather than kind of staggered like we've had in recent years.
Yeah, very interesting start to the season. Just to recap, obviously the St. Petersburg race this weekend. We go to a newish race, or returning race in Phoenix, but on a very kind of different layout of track compared to when they last went. Then a completely brand new event in Arlington, and into the month we go to a road course at Barber Motorsports Park, which is one of Palou's happiest hunting grounds. But let's move on to his teammate Scott Dixon, obviously coming back off the quietest run to third in the championship ever, as his team boss described at the end of last season. And it was a very strange 2025 for Scott Dixon. He kind of was there or thereabouts, but never seemed to be at the front like he usually is. And he wasn't the serial winner that we've seen Scott Dixon be before. I mean, the only race he won was because of about the one mistake Palou had made the entirety of last season, where he picked up the pieces when Palou ran wide at Mid-Ohio. So it's a difficult one for Dixon, because ultimately there's no hiding the fact that he's in his mid-40s. He's heading into the latter part of his career. And what can Dixon achieve? Like, will he beat Palou across the course of the season? Well, it's kind of difficult to see that happen in our minds. But Scott Dixon is the absolute master of racecraft. He's about the one driver of at least one ability better than Álex Palou. And for Dixon, it's kind of about getting back to winning ways, I think, and just trying to show that consistency that showed across the entire course of his career, always being in the top 5, always being in the top 3. And ultimately, he has the capability to challenge for a championship. Just maybe we didn't see enough of him last season, as weird as that is to say about the legend that is Scott Dixon.
Yeah, I think Dixon was pretty disappointed with last year, and the fact that he was so disappointed and he still finished third in the standings, I think was pretty emblematic, really, of the gulf that there was between Palou and really the rest of the field, because you had Palou with his kind of just ultra consistency, and then it just felt like pretty much the entirety of the rest of the field and all the people you'd expect to be front runners were pretty inconsistent. I feel like we come into this season with Dixon in a pretty similar position to we have for a few years now. Like, he's obviously in his mid-40s, but he is still a 6-time champion. I feel like we've had that for a few years now, whereby, we've kind of commented on the fact that his raw pace, which has never been something that's been his super strong suit in qualifying, but that's not necessarily up to scratch with the likes of Palou. But because of his credentials, obviously you can never rule him out, and he's still picking up wins every year. And I feel like he's still got those brains, the racing brains, and he's still as canny as he's always been, and he's still shown that he can make the perceived impossible happen. And there were times last year as well where he rolled the dice and kind of nearly worked, came up short a bit. I think you're going to be hoping that comes up short a little bit less. But I think the issue now for Dixon is the fact that Palou has grown the knack to have that same sort of race intelligence and execution on race day, but he has the pace as well, and he's always up front. And it's not like sometimes you have with Dixon where he's in the back of the pack having to roll the dice. Palou will execute the same thing from the front of the field. And yeah, interesting. I don't think there's any surefire evidence that Dixon's slowing down yet, but yeah, I think this year will be an interesting. I don't know. I think it'd just be interesting to see how he rebounds, given how emphatically he was beaten within the team by Palou.
Yes, it's an interesting one because Scott Dixon is the all-time great and he has access to Álex Palou's data, but can you beat somebody like that in the same team who is just doing everything so superbly? And I think for Dixon, one of the big things is the Indy 500. Ultimately, it feels a bit unjust that he's only got one Indy 500 to his name after the career he's had. And obviously last year's Indy 500 basically was over before it begun with that bizarre failure he had right at the start. So running up chances for an Indy 500 crown, he's still extremely quick at the Speedway. Is there an opportunity there for another victory? It'll be 18 years since his previous. And let's just look at Kyffin Simpson rounding out Chip Ganassi Racing, obviously heading into his third season in the sport. And last year's sophomore season was a real improvement on, I think, what many had expected, particularly on his rookie year, claiming podiums, multiple top fives. I think what let Simpson down across the course of the year was consistency. But when you're kind of coming into a third-year driver now, it's kind of the expectation is right that consistency should be shown race to race. He's obviously shown to be a bit more comfortable on road courses generically, but he was very strong at Nashville last year, which kind of showed he's got credentials on ovals too. So the pace has been shown at times throughout last season, but it was kind of on 4 or 5 occasions. I think a real goal for Simpson is to try and make that a little bit more consistent, get those top 10s, top 5s more regularly, and maybe even an outside shot at top 10 in the championship this year.
I think the step forward he made last year was actually emblemised by really the final laps of the season at Nashville, where, you know, ovals were the big weakness for him, and they probably still are as well. I don't think we've had enough evidence to suggest that he's eradicated those, but, you know, he was running for several laps side by side with Scott McLaughlin, who is widely regarded as one of the best on ovals. So I thought that was really encouraging. I think he made a big jump, I guess, just in pure pace. Like, I think the first year we were used to him being pretty much exclusively in the 20s in qualifying. He definitely made a step forward from that, and he had, some very good race results. Like, I think you could argue that some of them were fortuitous, but at the same time, he still executed when he got in those positions. And I think you've got to expect really that trajectory will continue in 26. I think I agree that, you know, he probably should be fighting for his first win.
Let's go on to Team Penske, who are looking to bounce back after a very, very difficult 2025 season, which was very, very well documented. And could they form the biggest challenge to Álex Palou across the course of the year? I mean, quite possibly. They've got a very strong 3-car lineup, obviously headlined by David Malukas replacing Will Power in the 12 entry. But let's start off with Joseph Newgarden, who was under the radar he was under the spotlight, I should say, for a large part of last season, usually because of no fault of his own, as we've explained many a time. But the last 3 seasons have been very, very difficult for Joseph Newgarden for the various different reasons, and he's still got the capability. There's absolutely no doubting he still has the ability, and he is still somebody who will undoubtedly challenge for a championship if the stars align, which they haven't in the previous few seasons. But Joseph Newgarden seems to be a very big mindset person. He likes to close himself off from others, and he's continuing to kind of do that this off-season. He's staying very low-key like he usually does, and again, as you go for another reset to prepare for a season, we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, Newgarden has to bounce back. He did claim that victory in Nashville last year, but this season, you've got to be expecting multiple race victories and ultimately an outside shot at a championship challenge.
This is year 10 now for Newgarden with Penske, and it's actually believed to be a contract year for him as well. So that adds an extra dimension to this kind of bounce back attempt. But yeah, it's a weird one because it's hard to say, like, whether you look in the context of like possible suitors, if he does go elsewhere, like it's hard to say he's got anything to prove because he's a 2-time champion, a 2-time Indy 500 winner. But equally, like he does need to get out of what has become an ever-growing slump because, like, okay, there's no doubt that finishing 12th in the standings last year was massively freakish. There was a lot of bad luck and a lot of retirements that were out of his control. But it's also part of a downwards trend because he's gone from winning the championship in 2019, also in 2017, finished runner-up 3 seasons in a row, and then since has finished 5th, 8th, and now 12th. And the 8th and the 12th in the last 2 seasons have been his 2 worst with Penske. Last season, 12th was his worst he's had since 2014, which was, I think, his 3rd year in the series. So I think while a lot of it this year will just be avoiding misfortune, and that will naturally vault him up the standings, or should anyway, I think there are also elements in terms of execution and consistency that he needs to improve upon, because there are even years gone by in this kind of run where, okay, he's winning 4 or 5 oval races, but actually it feels like elsewhere he's not quite been at the same standard. But ultimately, this is one of the series superstars, and I still firmly believe that he is that, especially, you know, on ovals where he's still an absolute force to be reckoned with and probably still the best in the series. But he has looked a waning force in recent years, and I think he really needs to correct that this year, because it is a real downwards kind of line on the graph at the moment.
I think something we haven't mentioned, which is kind of off topic, but as a chosen you guys bring it up, the Fox adverts return this year. We'll come back to Álex Palou in a minute, but what did you think of Chosen New Guys? I know it was the first one a little while ago, but what were your thoughts on it?
Gory, ripping Pato O'Ward's heart out. But no, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I thought it was another kind of good show of his character. I feel like it kind of leaned a bit into this like villainous streak that he's grown, which it's a bit of a weird one, because we've spoken about the fact that actually, to me at least, he feels like a bit of an unwilling villain. He's kind of grown this tag in recent years, and actually I don't think, you know, he's claimed he's an introvert. I don't think it's something he actually embraces, but I think for the advert it worked quite well.
Yeah, there's some good Easter eggs with the expiry date and the meat being the Indy 500 date in 2024, and the meat being ripped out in the shape of a heart, and Pato put some very funny comments on Instagram, whatever it was. And we'll briefly go back to Palou, because he had another ad. Newgarden and Palou both did last year's. I like Newgarden's one from last year more, but I like Palou's one from this year more. I think, yeah, I got that right. Palou's one was obviously with him shopping and everyone else going really, really slowly as he was trying to pick up some milk, which was obviously amusing, referring to his Indy 500 victory from last season. So, yeah, did enjoy that. And again, I like the fact they're playing to the characters. You don't get adverts like this in the UK, so Fox did another good job with Palou there. Yeah,
I thought the Palou one was like just a perfect exemplification of how the guy's like living in a different world. You're right, though. We don't get stuff like this in the UK. Like, I think it's a big credit to Fox that they've really, I mean, obviously we spoke about this all last year, but the fact that they've continued to just lean into the drivers' personalities. I guess we should probably just talk about the other two as well, because
let's do it. It's a good segue.
We had Pato O'Ward and we had Will Power. Will Powers is probably my favourite.
Will Power is my favourite, yeah.
Where there's just, I think they counted 12 or 13 different versions of Will Power, whether he's walking a dog or, you know, driving in a truck or ordering something at a pub or whatever. I thought it was just great. There's loads of Wills, and then it kind of just cut to the chase, and eventually it was just, there's only one Will Power, and I just thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, and he has the billboard for Will's Wheels, and if you call that number, it gives you a really amusing voicemail from Will Power to the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. Now, if you're American, call it yourself. We can't call it, because otherwise we'll be charged about £1,000 to make that call from the UK. But if you're American, it's probably worth a listen. It's pretty funny if you call the Wheels billboard. That is a tongue twister. Wheels billboard. There we are.
That's good. What about Pato's? That was probably my least favourite that's been so far. I just thought it was a little bit weird. Like, it was still fine. It was good.
I think the concept is funny.
I think there's a better way that you can showcase the guy who is probably your biggest personality than driving a bin lorry,
garbage
as we
truck.
call them. Garbage truck, as the Americans will say.
Yeah, I mean, I thought like it's a funny concept with the lorry knocking everything over, and what was it? He didn't decide to do his driving here; he does it on the track instead. It was a bit of a longer advert than the other ones, which was interesting. But no, I thought look, it plays into the character again. Pato's a bit cheeky like that, and it works for him compared to the other ones. So
it contrasted the very kind of luxury lifestyle that he lives.
Yeah,
which I found I don't really understand it, but like I'm sure there was a meaning behind it.
Okay, so you are the Fox Sports director. You can add one more ad. Who would it be for?
That's a really good question, actually. It's probably going to be Dixon, really, because I mean you've got the modern. Well, I suppose you could argue the modern greatest is now that Palou's burst onto the scene, but greatest of his generation. Something to do with ice.
Yes. I think you can make a really funny one out of Malukas. Like, I think maybe you need to get time for the general public to maybe know him a little, like, you don't need to be a super IndyCar fan to probably have heard of Álex Palou, but you probably need to know a little bit to know David Malukas. So it's about leaning into those personalities a bit more. So I think the other ones I think would be really good. I think McLaughlin could have a fun one.
Yeah, he was the other one. He's picked one of the Scots.
I think you can make a decent one with Kirkwood. I think you need to let him maybe a year or two. I think Kirkwood would be a really funny one to do, just because he's just like, I think the thing about Kirkwood, he's just a normal guy. He comes across to me. He just fishes on his weekends and just lives on his boat in Florida, but just drives IndyCars really fast. You could
definitely work. You could work with that for sure. I think Rossi's the other one. Tap into the perceived boringness. Yes. Because it's weird because he isn't actually boring. He's actually quite an interesting and amusing guy. But I think they could tap into that as well. Relatable.
I think you can't just on the basis that he hasn't had much success, but I think Santino Ferrucci at some point, like leading into that villain arc and him being hated and the unpopular guy, I think could be good. But I think you need a little bit more success because rooting for somebody who's kind of finishing top 15 some weekends isn't particularly easy. But anyway, let's circle back to Scott McLaughlin, one of our suggested advertisees, and similar to Newgarden, comes off the back of a disappointing season, not to the same extent, but McLaughlin did go winless, which was kind of a big shock for our last year's champion prediction. You found out our champion prediction this year later on this week, but as the same for Newgarden, it's going to be a bounce back year for McLaughlin. He's year 7 now, six. Year 6 of Indy. Well, he did one race in 2020, so I'm still right.
Six. Well, yeah.
6.1. Obviously, yeah, he's just got to bounce back. Like, ultimately, he has the capability to be a championship contender. We've seen what he can do in road courses. We've seen what he can do on ovals. But the pace was generally lacking compared to his teammates at times. And it wasn't a case of he had the ridiculous misfortune Newgarden had across the course of the year. He did have his bad, unlucky moments, but it wasn't quite to the same extent. It just felt McLaughlin wasn't quite on it as we've seen him be in previous years. We know he's got capabilities. It's just about refocusing. It seemed to be some kind of a team-wide issue, but McLaughlin's going to be absolutely back in a championship picture this year, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's been pretty accountable, to be fair. Like on Media Day, I think he described the year from kind of his own behalf as being terrible. And it's an interesting case, really, because he came into last season with, a very widespread feeling that he could be a possible champion. And he was certainly up there as one of the favourites alongside Palou. And I know we particularly made some pretty emphatic predictions because the 2024 had been so strong, and he'd had a very good 2023 as well. He'd been the lead guy at Penske, the lead Chevy guy, and then he goes and repeats that again in 24, but adds oval wins to it. And it kind of just felt like he was becoming the complete package. And heading into 25 was the first season where he was that like complete, well-rounded driver, 5th full season, and just felt like everything was coming together. He was one of the quickest in the field. But yeah, just in so many ways, it kind of ended up being a bit of a disaster. And he actually started quite well. It was just pretty much when he crashed before the start of the race for the Indy 500. Kind of felt like it derailed a bit from there. He went on an 8-race run with only one top 10. And I don't know, there was instability as well. Obviously, we had the issue with the team whereby the entire leadership team was fired, the 3 kind of most senior people after a rules breach in Indy 500 qualifying. That included McLaughlin losing Kyle Moyer, who was his strategist. And I just felt like it was kind of, I don't know, there was a lot of instability there. And to be fair, he actually ended the year a little bit better, 4 top 10s, a couple of podiums to round it out. There's been a lot more kind of change going into this season as well. He's got a new engineer, new strategist, new spotter. So it does kind of feel like a refresh of sorts, which is strange to say given the strong position it felt like he was coming into last year, with. But, he's looked really focused. He's looked excited this preseason. And I wouldn't rule him out kind of raising himself back into that title picture. I think last year was nothing more than a blip, personally.
And that strategist is one of the people who was removed in May, and Tim Cindric, as we alluded to back in a Tom Gamer episode, which was one of the bombshell bits of news in the IndyCar world during this off-season to see he was back after he was abruptly released from the team following the situation. But I mean, there was suggestions that Cindric kind of wanted a role which wasn't necessarily day-to-day in the shop, and this obviously gives him the opportunity to still be involved. It is slightly surprising still with Penske because they've seen Kyle Moyer move to Aaron McLaren, but Tim Cindric is back, which is going to be particularly interesting for this season. Obviously, running out the team is David Malukas. Obviously, maybe the driver coming into the season with the most attention on him out of anybody, considering the fact he is trying to fulfill the shoes of Will Power, obviously legendary in that number 12 car. And there's no expectation that Malukas is going to reach the heights of what Power did in his career, but it's the big move that Malukas will finally get to prove himself after he didn't quite at Aaron McLaren due to his injury. And as we said many a time, I spoke to him about, he's kind of recircled to this moment at Penske, and this is the opportunity that he's ultimately deserved, judging by what he's shown in previous years of his IndyCar career. And ultimately, it's kind of hard to weigh any big expectations of Malukas for the first year at Penske, especially when Penske themselves are in a bit of a rebuilding year, considering the leadership changes they made and the need to bounce back from last season. But there is a lot of attention on Malukas because we know he's a very fine driver, particularly on the areas. We're going to be looking at Gateway especially. Phoenix is already looking like a track Malukas has got great potential on. Ran very well at the Indianapolis 500 last year, so I think maybe realistically for Malukas, the first win would definitely be something that he'd probably leave the year happy with. And we'd also maybe be looking at top 10 in the championship, would be pretty decent considering where Penske were last year. And it's tough to kind of assess where we think Malukas is going to stack up because realistically he's not going to be the level Power has been at for the last couple of seasons. However, we do want to see enough from Malukas to prove that he's ready to take the reins at Penske and be a long-term fixture of that team.
Yeah, I mean, there's no beating around the bush. This is massive responsibility, replacing one of the greats of the sport who's been at the team for 17 years. But I genuinely get the impression he's relishing the kind of weight of that expectation and pressure so far. I think patience will be necessary because, in all likelihood, there will be errant weekends because, I mean, you only have to look at last year with AJ Foyt Racing. He was one of the quickest drivers in the series with one of the teams who's not, it's not one of the big four teams. I know they've obviously got a relationship with Penske at Foyt now, but he was quick and he was really quick. But there were also a lot of race days where he was quite scruffy. He'd still make mistakes and they need to be eradicated. And I think that will be a process. I think it's not fair to immediately judge him against Power. I think at least for the first half of the year, maybe when you get to the back end of the year and it's a lot of ovals, maybe you can start to judge him a bit more. But I kind of feel like judging him against Power is unfair at all. Like he said himself, he really wants to forge his own path here. So yeah, interesting one again. Like I feel like when you're evaluating Malukas, you probably do have to remember that, as you very kind of rightly point out, Dan, this is a team that's in recovery mode as well. So he's not coming into Penske and it's like pomp with real stability. But at the same time, like especially with Phoenix early on, he topped the first day of the test there last week. I wouldn't be surprised if he did hit the ground running. And I think, I firmly believe he has the character, the mindset, the approach to thrive here. And I believe he has the talent to succeed in the long term as well.
Let's go on to the person he will be replacing as Will Power moves to Andretti Global for 2026. And obviously the other side of the very big anticipated news, obviously he replacing Colton Herta, who went off to Formula 2 for 2026. He's going to wish Colton Herta the very best, hoping to see him fly the flag IndyCar for IndyCar very well. But yeah, big change of Power. Hasn't gone through a change this big in his IndyCar career. And it's obviously... people have spoken to him about a lot about the kind of the changes going into a new organization. But if it was his Power settled in pretty well, pretty quickly, he's obviously had a little bit less time compared to others, considering he was only allowed to move to Andretti on January the 1st. So whilst others kind of went to the new teams at the start of September, Power's had some catching up to do comparatively, but he seemed to adapt pretty quickly to life at Andretti. Seems pretty happy, and he seems fairly confident that the team has got credentials to really thrive under his tenure there. And he said at Content Days, we said in 3 years' time, he thinks Andretti will be challenging for the championships and winning championships. So he's got big ambitions for Andretti. He comes in as a real figurehead of a lot of experience, which I think is really what that team needs. It's kind of difficult to kind of stack up where Power's going to be this season. You'd like to think in the realms of where Kirk has been last couple of years, winning a couple of races, top 5, top 6 in the championship, I think would be a very, very good season for Power. So just going to be really interested to see how he gets on in such a big change in his IndyCar career, and can he continue the form he showed at Penske?
I mean, this is a real novelty as well, because this is a legend of the sport who's really forged that entire legacy with one team. For the first time in 17 years, it's a fresh start for him. So that's going to be really interesting to obviously watch. But also, I think that was a big reason why Power, on top of being frustrated at waiting for Penske to kind of make an offer and wanting something more long-term than they were offering, he did want a new challenge. And I think observing kind of how that goes will be intriguing. And why not get a new challenge? Because he's turning 45 at the start of the season. He had the opportunity to sign a long-term deal, multi-year at that age is quite something, and in a very competitive seat as well. So, yeah, I'm probably most intrigued by this, to be honest, because he's obviously been used to something at Penske for a decade and a half, and especially now in this modern era of IndyCar, the two teams have very different major strengths. You look at Penske, very strong on the ovals. For Andretti, you'd say the ovals are improving, but arguably biggest weakness, whereas they have the best street course package in the field. So I'm intrigued to see how Power adapts to all of that. Obviously, again, being used to the same thing. I think he did say on media day that it hasn't felt like it's been too abrupt, really. An IndyCar is still an IndyCar. And I guess wider in terms of Andretti, I'm interested to see, without Herta kind of at the head of the lineup as he has been for a few years now, how the dynamic may shift. And yeah, it's weird. I wonder whether how Power performs will be a reflection on how Herta performed at points as well. I think Andretti have had execution issues which have let Herta down at points as well, and they've been inconsistent as a team. And I think Power's leadership can maybe help to rectify that. But yeah, it'll just be interesting to see whether any of that was, or how much of some of the struggles was Herta induced or what have you. And that's not meant as a stick to beat Herta with, but I'm just intrigued because you've got this great coming into a seat that's been occupied by this hotshot young talent for, over half a decade now. So that'll be interesting as well, having that sort of change at the top of the Andretti lineup.
When is Colton Herta going to stop being referred to as young? He's been young for too long.
Well, he is still young though. He's 26. He's compared to Power being,
and yet he's been around for 8 years.
Yeah, but it's still, yeah. I mean, I guess it's just a marker of how young he came into the sport, really. But yeah, it's going to be really strange seeing someone else in the 26 car, and also not seeing Gamebridge on the car.
They've changed the livery slightly, which I think will be less. I think getting used to Malukas and the Horizon car is going to be particularly weird because the livery is not really different. Oh, it's well, no, it's not. It's Malukas. I think, as you said, the Power side is interesting, but I'm really interested to see how Kyle Kirkwood gets on this season as well. And obviously, 2025 was Kirkwood's best in IndyCar by an absolute country mile. Obviously, won 3 races, including on an oval, which was really impressive. I think what we both will agree kind of let us down a little bit was he was a bit inconsistent, particularly towards the back half of last year. That kind of crash when he was running 4th in Highline practice in Iowa really kind of put him off for the rest of the season. And after that point, he only scored 2 top 10s in the final 7 races of the year, which for a driver of his caliber shouldn't be the case. He's still finished 4th in the championship, and that's a very good basis to build on heading to the season. I think that 4th in the championship also shows kind of how weak the field was generally, how spread out they were last year. But where does Kirkwood go from here? Andretti haven't really mounted a proper championship challenge in a very, very long time. Indianapolis 500 has been a struggle for a while, but Kirkwood kind of seems very comfortable at the team now. He's been at the team for 3 seasons. He's very comfortable in the environment, and he won't say it, but he's kind of the lead driver. He's the guy who's been at the team for the longest now, and he's got a sufficient amount of IndyCar experience, and he is the one who, if you would pick out the 3 in my mind, he's the most likely to be an IndyCar champion with Andretti as things currently stand. So can he be the guy to challenge Palou? Well, he seemed the most confident at Content Day that maybe they have something to challenge Palou with. It's just about having that consistency across the course of the year, like we've seen him do before, but continuing to have those wins. They're so good on street courses, as you say, and we have even more street course races this season, including 3 new street course races. Now we've got Washington as well. So, I mean, a lot of potential there for Kyle Kirkwood to maybe mount an outside chance at a championship. And I think for him, top 3 in the championship is an easy expectation. Yeah,
I obviously kind of mentioned the dynamic shift with Power, but yeah, I think it is almost as pertinent with Kirkwood, really, because it's felt like in the last, 3 years he's had with the team, he's really kind of posed a threat to Herta's standing as almost the golden boy of that team. So now with Herta going and trying to pursue the F1 dream, I kind of feel like Kirkwood does naturally just assume that role. Like, he very kind of firmly claimed there is no leader, but I think he is the figurehead in terms of, looking ahead to the long-term future, because as I say, like Power's in his mid-40s, it's not going to be a long-term play, whereas, Kirkwood's just signed a new deal this off-season, really affirmed his loyalty to Andretti, and, I can see this lasting for a very long time, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, he's ever since he's joined the team, he's jumped up every year, gone from 11th to 7th to 4th now in the standings, and I think I agree, like, top 3 in the championship probably is a reasonable goal. Like, there were points last year where, he did look like he would be Palou's closest challenger, and that did fade as the year went on. I think it was pretty disappointing to see some of that inconsistency, because especially after he won that race at Gateway, I thought, like, oh my word, like, we're actually seeing the making of a champion here who's really grown into the complete package. I think actually when you take a step back, he's still not one of the top protagonists on road courses or even ovals, really. Like, he's had some good oval races, but not consistently enough. Like, obviously he won Gateway and that was a really good performance, but I think, part of that owes to obviously Andretti's package. I think even the fading as last year progressed, a lot of that was kind of that combination of team problems and obviously some scruffiness on his own part. But yeah, I feel like he is, as every year goes by, increasingly, flourishing and looking like a future champion. I don't see why that stops this year. I think you've just got to hope there's not, like, for instance, Herta finished second in the standings in 24 and he really regressed last season. So you've just got to hope that now Kirkwood's kind of reached the heights of, finishing the top 5 in the standings, he doesn't kind of drop like we saw from Herta, and he's got to just continue that momentum.
And on the other side of the garage, you've got Marcus Ericsson. This year seems like a bit of a crunch year for him, obviously heading into the final year of his contract. And the first 2 years at Andretti have been very, very underwhelming. First season was a bit of a disaster all round. Says he wasn't quite ready, maybe not quite a headspace. He came to 2025 with this kind of big mental shift, and results didn't improve at all. And Ericsson, driving one of the top cars in the field, ended up 20th in this championship with 2 top 10s to his name. And ultimately, that can't continue, especially if he's looking at keeping that seat for 2027. He needs to have a fast start to the year. They've got Dennis Howe, got Dale Coyne Racing, who is already felt like it's being slowly nurtured for that seat. Well, Ericsson's got to prove early on in the season as to why they should put their faith in him. And we've seen him do it again last year with that consistency, but it just hasn't translated across to his Andretti career, which has been ever so bizarre. And ultimately, this year is all about starting off well for Marcus Ericsson and proving that the last 2 years were difficult for whatever reason that's behind him. He's still a top IndyCar driver.
I think you could probably argue this is the biggest season in his IndyCar career to date. He's coming off, probably his 2 worst seasons, in IndyCar since he joined Andretti 2 years ago. And, he was one of IndyCar's, like we would refer to him as, Mr. Consistent, and an Ericsson day was a, that was a thing in our early stages of this podcast a few years ago when he was at Ganassi. But from that kind of consistency and reliability, I feel like he's kind of almost diminished into the complete antithesis of that. Like, he's joined Andretti after 3 successive seasons, 6th in the standings. The stats here, 50 races across 21, 22, and 23 with Ganassi. He was only outside the top 15 4 times. In 2 years with Andretti, he's only had 9 top 10s, obviously only 2 last season. In his final year with Ganassi in 23, he had 14 top 10s alone, which is 5 more than the tally he's got in his 2 years with Andretti. And I think you could put the 24 season down to maybe just struggling to adapt to a new team. But the fact that he then got worse in 25 and quite a lot worse was a major concern. The fact that he finished 20th in the standings, like 15th was bad enough in that first year, but doing that heading into a contract year, I mean, it piles a hell of a lot of pressure on. And it's hard to pick out the reasons as well. Like he said, he spiraled after the Indy 500 where he finished second and then got that stripped because of a violation on the car. He said he lacked a bit of trust in the car throughout the couple of years as well. But yeah, I mean, if he repeats this again, like, it could be the end of his IndyCar career, at least at a front-running team.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the experience to know what he wants out of a car and how to maximise performance. He's been in IndyCar for 7 seasons now. This is heading into year 8, I believe. So he absolutely can't afford to kind of have that same results. Even before the Indy 500, he wasn't particularly strong last year, but you can see why I put him down a little bit, because ultimately it was his own error which cost him a second Indianapolis 500 victory. Let's go on to Owen McLaren, obviously headlined by Pato O'Ward once again heading into this season. And O'Ward was Palou's closest challenger, quote unquote. He was still very, very far away, but was the one mathematically closest to him in a championship. And last year, we did see improvements in O'Ward, particularly in kind of race-to-race consistency. We didn't have these errant weekends from O'Ward that we've seen previously. We didn't have those weekends where the team seemed completely devoid of pace. Christian Lundgaard, as I said many times, really kind of elevated O'Ward to a new level. He continued his really impressive oval form, but it kind of made a step up in throwing street courses, as well as showed good adaptability. Like, he maybe didn't have the raw pace that we're currently seeing from Palou, but in my mind, it still feels like he is the one closest to Palou, and it kind of feels like he's waiting for that big result, an Indianapolis 500 victory, an IndyCar championship, or a season where he's getting 5-6 wins. And it feels like he's now really coming to his own, and this season could potentially be the one where he achieves those goals.
Yeah, I mean, last year was his best year to date, and really in doing so, he really spearheaded what was the team's best year yet, really, too, because it's still a team in its infancy. Like, the McLaren name only came back in, a little over half a decade ago. So, yeah, he was quite impressive, I thought, last year to really emerge as quite a comfortable second in command to Palou. Eventually, obviously, after Kirkwood had that early flurry in, the kind of opening half of the season. And I feel like we've criticised O'Ward a lot over the years of having these kind of just gaggles of races at points where he might go a little bit off the rails, but he never really had such a run, I thought, last year, or really any races like that last year. And it feels like he finally came into his own in terms of that, I guess, just reliability in terms of what he's going to deliver.
Yeah, and we do need to remember O'Ward effectively lost 100 points in the last 3 races by having issues out of his control at both Portland and Nashville. So the results on paper maybe aren't as representative as O'Ward's season was. But yes, he was the closest guy to Palou, especially in the second half of the year, kind of when he was winning races in Iowa, Toronto, Portland, as I say, Nashville, where he was also strong, and he finished top 5 in every race in the second half of the season. Apart from the 2, he had a mechanical failure from the lead. Like, that is the consistency that somebody needs to battle Palou in the second half of a championship year. And could he be the one to do it? Well, quite possibly. McLaren have kind of made that improvements they need to, as you say, is about not regressing. And I think what is really going to help him is continual support from Christian Lundgaard, who had a really, really good year at Aaron McLaren year 1, as we've mentioned. And for him, easy goal is to get that first win with McLaren. He was probably unlucky not to have it in Portland last year after having that pole lost through an engine penalty. And his pace on road courses was superb throughout the course of last year. Got obviously many podiums throughout the year. Was on occasion the closest guy to Palou on those road courses, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that be a common theme throughout the year. And obviously the big thing for Lundgaard is just continue developing on those ovals. I think we saw real improvement in his oval form across the course of the year, and by the end of the season he was competitive on ovals, not to the same extent as O'Ward, but he was showing well on ovals. And continuing that development to year 2, I mean, he could become a serious package in a couple of years' time to fight for a championship. And 5th in the championship last year, that was a very, very good first season McLaren, and I think he can only build on that further.
I feel like you could kind of describe me as the breakout star of last year, but part of me also feels like that's a bit unfair, because everyone who was aware of what he was doing at RLL knew how good he was. I think what last year did, it just verified what we had seen at RLL, that he could be a genuine contender with a proper front-running team, one of the again, quote-unquote, big 4. And yeah, it's the first time that a teammate has really brought the fight properly to O'Ward. Like, the best previous finish of a teammate of his was 8th, and Lundgaard, realistically could have been 3rd if he hadn't failed to finish the race because of an issue in Nashville. Like, he was the guy, really, other than Palou on road courses. He was on the podium 5 times in the 7 road course rounds, and yes, ovals have been a sticking point, but that's largely because RLL had such an underperforming package that last year was a re-education of sorts. But I think even as the year went on, there were signs that he was growing in that discipline too. So yeah, I think this year, you could obviously go and say, oh, you should contend for a championship, but I think step by step, like if he can at least get a win on the board, he's obviously got one career win in Toronto with RLL, but that was, it's going about 3 years now. So yeah, I'd say get a win on the board, but also like if the opportunity does present itself, I wouldn't rule him out being a contender for a title as much as I'd say O'Ward could be a contender for a title, really, because he certainly has the ability. And he's another one where you kind of forget how young he still is as well.
And talking of young drivers, we've got Nolan Siegel filling out the third entry for Aaron McLaren, and there's no secret, this is a huge year for him. This is obviously his contract year, and many people will be looking at a third Aaron McLaren seat as one they want to take up. And there's obviously been an expectation placed for Siegel to finish top 10 in the championship this year. I kind of felt last year was slightly underwhelming. I don't think many people expected lows, but Siegel didn't really demonstrate the capabilities he has in his junior career, and we saw paces at times, but just not regularly enough. And when you see the heights that Lundgaard and O'Ward are achieving week on week, well, we need to start seeing that from Siegel. He's had a year and a half to effectively learn. He's been given a little bit of leeway just because he came in very abrupt nature to the series, but you kind of get to the point where there is no excuses. You've had the training time. We need to see what you can do, and ultimately for Siegel, the very clear target is top 10 championship. He wants to keep his seat, and that's ultimately going to rely on top 5 podium finishes. And it kind of feels like he's not fully comfortable yet on ovals. It's improving, and the pace was there at points, but the confidence maybe isn't fully there. And I think that's kind of a general thing as well. Maybe the confidence on road and street courses necessarily isn't always there either. So big year for Siegel, under a lot of pressure, but he never seems to really mind the pressure, is something I've gathered from Nolan Siegel.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a very mature head on young shoulders, but you're right. Tony Kanaan, as team principal, really laid out clearly what he needs to do this year, Siegel, to keep that drive, and kind of blindsided Siegel a bit as well. He made these comments to the media, and Siegel hadn't actually been told. I think Siegel keeps downplaying it, saying it's not that big a deal, whether he's managing expectations or what. But I think saying he needs to finish top 10 in the standings to keep his drive when he finished, I think, 22nd last year, it's quite a tall order, and I naturally expect him to make a step forward because last year, at the end of the day, was his first full season. But there's a heck of a lot of improvement needed if he's to finish top 10 in the standings, especially when you look how far he was off his teammates last year. Like, there were very occasional flourishes where he maybe had a good qualifying performance here or there where he matched them, maybe even beat them. I can't remember which road course it was. Okay, thank you. That's the one I didn't watch, the one I was away for. So that makes sense why I don't remember it vividly. But yeah, I think there was that. And there might even have been one, maybe Barber or something. He was there or thereabouts. So don't quote me on that, because that's just me trying to remember something that was nearly 12 months ago. But he needs to do that sort of thing much more consistently. And
right, let's go on to the final 3-car team of Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing, and it's been well documented, a lot of change in that team within the last 12 months. Obviously, with the appointment of Jay Fry, and they've since made other big signings in Gavin Ward and Brian Barnhart on a leadership type side. So a lot of changes going through that team. And what I would suggest is, if you haven't already, we spoke to our good friend Louis Foster a couple of weeks ago. Can I just reflect from a driver's perspective all the changes within the team in the last 12 months? And if you've never listened to one of our conversations with Louis Foster, they're always good fun. You get insight from a racing driver you never think you'd get it from a racing driver, but you always do when Louis Foster is on the show. But let's touch on Graham Rahal. Obviously, he is the one who's seen all the changes in the team, but he's been at the team obviously for a very long time, being his father's team. And it always feels it's just a bit frustrating year to year for Graham Rahal. The things that have been struggles, short ovals, Indy 500, just never really seem to crack on like he's always wishing for them to. And they've appointed the likes of Gavin Ward to really pay attention to that. And we've heard every off-season about Graham having this reset and the team going through these changes, but at least on this occasion, it feels like we've kind of gone through something a bit more meaningful on the team side, and hopefully that's going to propel them forward. And it's been a difficult few years for Graham. There's no way of looking around it, but ultimately we just need to see him get to the form that he did, 7-8 years ago, where he was one of the top drivers in the series.
Yeah, I think the way I would describe it is it's just gone a little bit stagnant, really. Like, he's had young teammates come in. They've often outperformed him, particularly Lundgaard. Obviously, there were times last year where it felt like even Foster was kind of having the edge on him. It's 9 years now since he last won a race in 2017. But at the same time, like, I don't feel ready to just say, like, yeah, he's done, count him out, because we still see some pretty strong weekends from him every year. Your Indy road courses.
The Indy road course every year.
Or Portland, usually those two. And I think they do showcase the fact that he still has the ability to qualify at the front and to race at the front. And I guess on the team side as well, you also can't undervalue the leadership that he brings, the experience as well. But as the team has kind of increasingly struggled in recent years, his results have tailed off as well, because as recently as 2021, he was 7th in the standings. I think he had 7 seasons in succession where he was in the top 10. But since that in 21, he's gone 11th, 15th, 18th, 19th. And it's a pretty stark trajectory. And it feels that he's just faded as a front runner. Like he was in that gaggle where you were fighting with the top teams, and it's just not happened for him. And a lot of that is probably owing to the fact that the team have undergone so much change and things not working after change, and then having to change the changes and everything along that line. It's just got pretty convoluted, and it does feel like things are restabilizing at the team now. There's a much better leadership core and a very deep leadership core in place behind the scenes. So I think the question off the back of that is, can that allow Rahal to really correct this course that he's been on over, getting on for 5 years now?
We know Graham Rahal has shown us in his previous career, and he's a team leader effectively from a driver's standpoint. So what can you do to bring that forward? And obviously Louis Foster, one of his teammates and a very good friend of the show. I mean, we won't spend too long on Louis, because if you want to hear the perspective of this, just listen back to the episode we had with him a couple of weeks ago. But as he's alluded to quite a lot, the big improvements he has to do is particularly racecraft. We saw his outstanding qualifying performance throughout the entirety of last season just didn't translate to races, and no top 10s last season, which was slightly disappointing. He probably deserved one based on how he drove over the course of the year. But he signed a long-term deal this off-season. He's going to be here to stay. The team has got at least another 3 years of the organisation. You obviously have a big belief in him. It's just on him to show the results. And we've seen a lot of potential from Louis Foster. It's about just kind of translating that performance on race days, you said, which was a bit of a struggle for him last season.
Yeah, I think having that multi-year deal definitely helps. It takes off some of that, obviously there's always pressure to perform, but it definitely takes off some of that burden of next year being a contract, or this year being a contract year for sure. But yeah, I'd say last year's rookie year was encouraging without having those results really. Obviously, we did have that pole, so that was encouraging, and obviously he was generally pretty quick in road course qualifying. So yeah, I do concur that the fact that he didn't actually finish in the top 10 at all was kind of unjust. He laid out for us what he wants this year: another pole, fight for podiums, top 15 in the standings. And I would say, actually, to be fair, 23rd in the standings last year was definitely an unfair representation of the peaks that we did see. But yeah, he does need to just up the execution. The team needs to up the execution as well, because the race day struggle wasn't just down to Louis struggling with tyres or whatever, which, was a bit of an issue for him. But, you look at pit stop strategy, setup. I know he always cites Road America last year when he started on pole, but they just had a ton of downforce on and basically made them a complete sitting duck on the straights. So yeah, off-season worth of lessons now kind of absorbed. So a whole season of experience to leverage heading into year 2.
And obviously, lineup completed by Mick Schumacher, the big signing this off-season. Obviously, somebody's going to bring a lot of attention to the sport due to his family name and the reputation he's built himself in Formula One and the World Endurance Championship. And we can't expect too much from Mick Schumacher year 1, I think, is the ultimate expectation. I mean, Rookie of the Year is something he's going to be going for, because you only have one chance to win that. But ultimately, unlike Dennis Hauger and Kyle Collette, he's got very little experience. Well, he's got no experience in Novas practically, apart from the tests he's done. He hasn't understood the Firestone tyres yet. He hasn't driven at many of the tracks, or he hasn't driven at any of the tracks apart from when he's been testing. So there's so much for Mick Schumacher to learn, and ultimately we can't expect him to fly out the blocks being top 5, top 10 in the standings. Whoever he is, it's a very difficult adaptation. But it's just going to be interesting to see how Schumacher gets on. He didn't seem to be happy in the World Endurance Championship, what he said, and obviously wanted to return to single seat as an IndyCar provides him that opportunity. And let's just hope he can kind of find him as mojo back in his racing career. He's going to bring a lot of attention just because of who he is. Let's hope that's positive and that he can show well in his first year.
I feel like I've said it a lot, but this is also a pretty big storyline coming into the year. We actually did do an episode at some point. I guess it was in January, maybe.
In January, yeah.
On the biggest storylines. So if you want more preview content, then yeah, you can go and look back to that. Also, I would say listen to our media day recaps as well, where we go into a lot of depth just on some of the stories we got from the drivers, which also kind of just adds a bit of meat to these bones that we are discussing today. But yeah, Schumacher, obviously, he comes in with a lot of experience while still being quite a young driver. He obviously had a tough stint in F1, and then he impressed in the World Endurance Championship. Like, he just didn't enjoy it seemingly, but he was pretty highly rated there. And to be fair, like, even in F1, he was dealt a very tough situation with Haas. And I feel like in that second season, there were glimmers of something really special. And I mean, he's an F2 champion. Like, he's a talented driver. It's not like he only has a career because of who his father is. But this is a real chance for him to kind of forge his own path and build his own legacy. And as you very rightly say, Dan, there's a heck of a lot that's new, whether it's the car, the lack of power steering, the tracks, the tires, the ovals. And to be fair, like, he showed fairly well in the Phoenix test last week. He's not finishing top of the times, but he's 16th in a session, which is against seasoned campaigners, pretty respectable really, in the first time he's ever run with other cars on track. But yeah, I mean, he really seems all in on this, and he already seems to be really embracing it. And he's not made any secret of the fact that he wanted F1, that he had talks with Cadillac, that those failed, but he's also been interested in IndyCar for a little bit of time now, and I do respect the process he went through in terms of coming over to do the test, to sound it out, spend a whole weekend embedded within the RLL team, and it does seem like he found it pretty fun straight away. And yeah, he's decided it's the best option for his future. I think since then he's shown maturity not to... I mean, he's ultimately not coming in with an ego of thinking, yeah, I'm Mick Schumacher, I've been in F1 and I know it all. Like, it's been the complete opposite of that. I think he's really respected the learning process. And I just really hope he is competitive and he enjoys it as much once the season rolls around and you get into the rigors of the racing, because he sees this as a long-term home, so long as obviously nothing comes up in F1 again. And that would be both big for his career and also the series as well, in terms of the spotlight that is shone on IndyCar for having someone like Schumacher, much like was the case when Grosjean first came over, for instance.
Okay, let's touch on Meyer Shank Racing. Two-goal lineup continuing with Felix Rosenqvist and Marcus Armstrong, continuing that relationship with Chip Ganassi Racing. And last year on paper was a great year, great improvement compared to previous seasons. Both cars within the top 10 of the championship, and yet the team still think they can improve further, which is really, really fascinating. I mean, Armstrong seemed quite disappointed at finishing 6th or 7th, whatever it was, in the championship, which was a bit of an eye-opener. And he's targeting top 8th, that was it. He's targeting top 3 this season, and I think we're at a stage where Meyer Shank race victories wouldn't be a surprise. I think, judging from what we've seen, the confidence that the team have got, that we could be seeing them challenging for top 5 to the podiums pretty much week in, week out. They've got a pretty strong combined line. I think Felix Rosenqvist last year finally got his first podium with the team, and just generally has shown very well in his 2 years of Shank. It was a bit of a interesting move when he made it 2 years ago, but it's adapted really well. And it's just continuing that trajectory the team is on, continuing to ride that wave and see ultimately where they can finish in the championship this season, because they do have a lot of potential. Yeah,
Rosenqvist has been a real shining light since he joined Shank in 24. I don't know, it feels really harsh to say he's kind of come from being just kind of one of the drivers at, Ganassi and then Arrow McLaren, one of the real powerhouse teams. But, he was kind of in the shadows of a Dixon and then in the shadows of an O'Ward, whereas he's joined Shank and he's really been the leader. And I know that maybe with Armstrong it was less so the case, and they were really both propelling the team forward together. But he's risen from kind of being a guy who was in the shadows to a guy who's really spearheading an operation. And he made that instant impact obviously 2 years ago in 24 with particularly excellent qualifying results initially, got that pole, but also a very consistent start to the season. And that first year kind of tailed off as the year went on. I think 12th in the standings felt a bit harsh ultimately. But in 2025, he proved that the highs that he showed in that first year were really no coincidence. And finishing sixth in the standings, that's the joint best in his career. I think he finished 6th in his rookie year with Ganassi. So he's matched that, and it was an absolutely justified sixth in the standings, because he probably was the 6th best driver. It wasn't like he kind of looked his way there remotely. And it's interesting as well, because you kind of look at it and think there's still room to improve even more. Like, I still think there were points, like to a lesser extent than 24, but he still had a bit of a tail off as the season progressed. So, yeah, I think more than anyone, really, Shank feel like the team destined to break through for what would be their first win since the 500 with Castro and Evers in 2021. And, obviously having a relationship with Chip Ganassi Racing in terms of that technical alliance obviously helps their cause. But I also think you can't discredit what Meyer Shank Racing alone are doing. It's not all just because they have a bond with Ganassi, because, I mean, they had a bond with Andretti ahead of last season, switched that, and they're still performing at this level. So there's a very strong team there.
Then let's go to his teammate Marcus Armstrong, as we said, was very disappointed in what we thought was a very impressive run to 8th in the championship. But obviously, having that Ganassi alliance deal, Armstrong is seemingly still employed by Ganassi, and obviously will fill the reins there if an opportunity comes available in the future. And he really impressed in his first year, Shank. I wasn't particularly sure on Armstrong even before last season, but really came into his own last year. Obviously, got that podium in Iowa, and we had a very renowned Armstrong ability throughout the course of last year. His miraculous ability to get into top 10 of the race without any explanation as to how he got there. I think for Armstrong's sake, the Armstrong ability has to end this year if he's going to achieve his goal of top 3 in the championship, because he'll want to move into the top 5, the top 3, and maybe find himself in victory lane for the first time in his career this season. So I think he's got the capabilities of doing it. His year-on-year progression in IndyCar has been really, really impressive, and on ovals he's adapted them pretty well as well. So big expectations for Armstrong, and I think he could have quite a good season.
Yeah, I think I completely agree that we were probably guilty of quite significantly underestimating him last year, to be honest. And I would say he was a real, surprise star of last year, really. Obviously, made the switch from Ganassi to Shank, kind of not. Obviously, kept a lot of the engineering core with the technical alliance there, but it was ultimately a change of team, and he made a really big step forward to produce. I mean, the Armstrong ability consistency was quite Dixon-like, really. The ability to kind of just find his way forward in races, and I think there were signs of some speed. He had some good qualifying sessions, but I don't think I ever look at Armstrong and expect outright pace to be his thing. Whereas, much like a Dixon type driver, he seems like a very canny and reliable racer. Like, he ended up in the top 10 11 times last season, including 10 of the final 13 races, 9 of the final 11, however you kind of want to look at that stat. And yes, he probably does need to raise his ceiling a bit further than that to build on 8th in the standings, and he knows that. But also, I think he gave the impression that, he felt like he had the ability to do that last year, and things maybe just weren't quite panning out. So, yeah, Armstrong is a very different prospect in my mind now to what he was this time a year ago. Absolutely.
Well, let's go on to Ed Carpenter Racing and continue the same 2-car lineup they did last year. The ownership obviously heads into its second season. We saw real potential from that ownership and the changes within the team. Obviously, Rasmussen claiming that victory in Milwaukee last year. Alexander Rossi comes off the back of topping the Phoenix test, which was a bit of a surprise. Obviously, Rossi's been to Phoenix before, it was really tested, but interesting to see them at the top of the time chart. So it was a good year one in the new investment, but it's about building on that for Ed Carpenter Racing. Rossi's obviously a very experienced series veteran, brings a lot of guidance and leadership to that team, and ultimately seems to be helping really kind of push that team forward. And as I said, it's just about building what they did in the year one, the investment. We're looking kind of next couple of years for those results to really start coming.
I mean, he was obviously enlisted as the figurehead, really, of this revamped Ed Carpenter Racing project with the new investments. And I didn't really know how to evaluate last year because, he started steadily, really seemed to lack any major results mid-season, ended with somewhat more of a flourish, but actually finished behind teammate Christian Rasmussen in the standings. Or, it was close, but you wouldn't have expected that. There wasn't a particularly marked step forward on what came before him in terms of, he finished 15th in the standings, which was below that threshold of Rinus VeeKay in each of his 5 years, finishing between 12th and 14th. And I would expect a step forward this year, with obviously having a whole off season to dissect what happened last year. First full off season as well with a new investment in place. And I think it just feels like the team's in a more stable place, less transitional. So I would expect a step forward to more what we're used to from Rossi this year.
And obviously partners with Christian Rasmussen again, and Rasmussen was one of the stars last year, particularly on the ovals, obviously claiming 2 podiums, including that win in Milwaukee. And he's got the ovals nailed down. That's no doubt about it. It's just about trying to translate that into road courses, which we haven't always seen from Rasmussen. We've seen it at points in his career, but definitely not consistently enough. And from what we've seen, especially in the ovals, I mean, Rasmussen's got the signs of being one of the biggest stars of the series in future years. It's just kind of showing that consistency race to race. And if he can continue the fireworks and the stardom we did in ovals last year, I'm sure nobody's going to complain, because he's a great addition for viewing perspective on the series.
Yeah, you're right. Like he currently isn't enough of a consistent factor on road and street courses. He was in the top 15 only 5 times last year, and he had one top 10 as far as I have done my very rushed research. But, you know, I still think that when you look at what he did on the ovals, Ed Carpenter's faith in him as a pretty raw talent after that first year is showing to have paid off. It was obviously chose to keep him on board over Rinus VK to partner Alexander Rossi. And yeah, he probably emerged last year as IndyCar's most exciting driver with that aggressive style on ovals. It was endlessly impressive how he walked the tightrope of that aggression and risk-taking to take that first career win. And it does feel like a continual balancing act. I don't know how sustainable it's going to prove long term, but you are right. Like he's proven already to be one of the best drivers on an oval. But yeah, he just needs to make that step forward elsewhere. And I think for the long term of, you know, for his long term future really, and for the long term success of the team, he does need to grow into more of a complete package, as much as what he is doing on ovals is very impressive.
And let's move on to AJ Foyt Racing. Santino Ferrucci, somehow it's his 4th season with the team. That doesn't feel correct, but it is, I assure you. And it's been a couple of weird seasons for Ferrucci. 2024 was obviously that real outstanding year where we saw an unfounded consistency from him. Obviously, top 10 in the championship. We thought, okay, has he turned the page here? And then start last year was quite disappointing. Went into a really good mid-season spell where he got 2 podiums. And I think he got 4 top 5s in a row, whatever it was. And then kind of fell off again a little bit towards the end of the last season. It's about kind of having that consistency throughout the season. We've seen there's peaks from Ferrucci, but not necessarily the consistency year to year. And, you know, Malukas was favoured over him for the Penske seat, for example, even though they were on a pretty level pegging order. I think Ferrucci is going to play a good mentorship role to his teammate Kyle Coletta, we'll get on to a little bit later. But it's just about kind of showing those peaks across the course for the whole season, which we said for a lot of people. But we know Ferrucci's capable, especially on the ovals. But we didn't quite see at times what we had expected from Ferrucci last season, which was a little bit disappointed compared to the really impressive 24 season that he had.
It was a weird year, and it was ultimately one of regression because, you know, he was obviously so impressive, making such a big step forward from 19th to 9th in the standings between 23 and 24. He had 11 top 10s in the 24 season. So last season, okay, he had a really strong mid phase. I think he had 4 top 5s on the trot, actually, in that mid portion around the 500. Got his first podiums on the podium on a road course, first podium on a street course. But away from that kind of hot streak, it was pretty cold, to be honest. Like he wasn't really a factor. But this is why it's weird as well, is the fact that he dropped 16th in the standings, but actually still could have been 11th if he didn't lose the points for finishing second in Detroit because of a violation on his car, which allowed him to keep his podium, but got deducted the points. That was that kind of streak last year of strange penalties happening in and around the 500. But yeah, I think he acknowledged this as well. There was a bit too much scruffiness. Like Toronto, he missed the entire race because he crashed in warm up. Like, can't be doing that. Like,
Portland crashed lap 1. Laguna Seca, he was messy. Like there was plenty.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought we'd lost that side of him after, you know, such an impressive 24. So I think it's pretty clear that this year the goal is to return to that consistency. He feels the ceiling's pretty high. I think he said he thinks they can finish top 5 in the championship, which is not quite as bold a claim as saying they could win the championship last year, or maybe at least contend for it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit steep to say finish top 5 in points, but never say never.
Never say never. And obviously partners alongside Kyle Coletta, who is the second rookie that we're going to go over, and he steps up from me next after finishing as the vice champion. Obviously a lot of support from his home nation in Brazil. And I feel not many people know about Kyle Coletta. He seems quite a reserved guy. We don't really know loads about him, and I think that's kind of difficult to wear expectations on Coletta. He's got the most American experience of the three rookies, the most oval experience, but really didn't quite show that oval development in Indy next. But he's obviously got a good team to learn from in Santino Ferrucci, a good teammate who's really shown well at ovals. And
I do agree that he's probably one of the biggest unknown quantities heading into the season, because he had a very solid 2 years at Indy next after obviously moving over from the F1 ladder. He was a race winner in F3, but he was beaten both seasons in Indy next by exceptional champions. Like Louis Foster dominated in 24. Obviously, Collette finished third, actually, also behind Jacob Abel. And then last year, Dennis Hauger came in and was so impressive as well. We'll get onto him very shortly. But yeah, I mean, he made things tough in the end for Hauger last year. But obviously, IndyCar's a whole different ball game, and it could translate to a realm where Collette is more competitive than Hauger. Like if he takes to the car better, or it's very, very hard to say. But he obviously slides into a ride in which Malukas was very quick last year, still has that link to Penske, and he seems to have tested well and has impressed the team. Ferrucci's spoken highly of him, and I think he's kind of just sliding a bit under the radar in this rookie battle, and I absolutely wouldn't rule him out of the fight.
Let's go on to Juncos Hollinger Racing. Obviously, a slightly different lineup with Reedus, VK partnering Stingray Rob this season. Now, VK, obviously a bit of a surprise move. Had a really good first year of Dale Coyne Racing. Moving over to Juncos Hollinger Racing was a bit of a surprise, but VK seemingly only there for the year, kind of reevaluate what he'll feel at the end of the year in regards to his IndyCar future. But a brave move from VK, but we saw what he could do at Coyne. So could VK replicate what he did at Coyne at Juncos Hollinger Racing? That's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, that kind of consistency between 12th and 14th in the championship. Can he achieve it with Juncos Hollinger Racing? Well, we said he couldn't with Dale Coyne Racing, so why couldn't he at Juncos? And he obviously spoke to Connor Daly, seemed pretty positive from what Daly had to say about the team. Obviously, they were teammates at Ed Carpenter Racing. So does VK have the potential to continue that 12th to 14th in standings, or can he go even further than that? I mean, Juncos have really generally struggled last couple of years, apart from kind of a few stand-up performances that we saw from Grosjean, Eilert from occasions, and Daly really showed well in the ovals last year. So the team has a baseline, but just not much consistency race to race. But is that something VK can provide like he did at Dale Coyne Racing last year? Well, that's ultimately the big test of his mettle this season.
I think there are definitely parallels to the situation he was in last year. And I think, to be fair, it was something of a surprise to see him trade Dale Coyne for Juncos after such a good season. And, after 5 years with Ed Carpenter Racing, obviously 25 was his first season actually with a different team, joined Coyne late in the off-season and really shone in that different environment and guided forward what was a seriously ailing team to massive improvement. And I guess that's where the parallels come in. Obviously, JHR aren't in as bad a position as Coyne were after their 24 season, where they had the driver merry-go-round and, they were just miles off the competitive level of anyone else. That's not what JHR are. But I think there are parallels in terms of the project elements of it. I think, actually, to be fair, looking at what Coyne achieved last year, you could argue that VK's traded them for a team that is actually probably now a tier below. Obviously, maybe not on ovals, but at least on road and street courses, you could argue that's the case. And you've just got to look, I guess, at the transformative impact that he had on Coyne. And I personally have pretty high expectations for him to kind of repeat something similar, because he's made this gamble to go and leave for this new opportunity again.
And in fairness to VK, you do say a step down, but ultimately we only consider that a step down because of the work that he did at Coyne last season. And ultimately, it's can he replicate that? And us going 12 months' time, well, is that a step down because of the work that he's done at Juncos? Now, obviously, he's going to be alongside Stingray Rob, returning for his first IndyCar season where he returns to a team. Obviously, his contract saga was a bit strange this off-season, where there wasn't quite clarity on whether he would be returning or not. That is now the case. And obviously, it's been a difficult first 3 years for Rob, but now he's kind of got that continuity. It really gives him a chance to kind of get rid of the excuses of it's a new team every year. This is his fourth year in the series. He's got the experience now. Ultimately, it's about trying to convert that into results, which we haven't really seen him do thus far in his IndyCar career.
Yeah, you're right. There's kind of no real hiding now. I think you can't undervalue how important that continuity is, because it has been a lot of chopping and changing, and that kind of helped him kind of settle as an IndyCar driver, really. And he's kind of aware of the fact that, there's improvements needed. He spent the off season undergoing some driver coaching, for instance, and yeah, it was a weird off season because like you could call it a saga. It was kind of a saga, not saga. They took down any evidence of him off their website. Took a while for them to actually formalize the fact that he was coming back, but he claimed that he was always going to come back. So yeah, I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I think he feels he's made some important discoveries ahead of this season, and he kind of needs to make a step forward because he can ill afford another season kind of dwindling in the low teens in the 20s and finishing in the 20s in the championship. So yeah, kind of eradicates the excuses. Not excuses. That feels unfair because he's quite accountable. He's not someone to make excuses. So that isn't fair. But there's no reasons for him to not kick on this season.
And we're going to end off with Dale Coyne Racing, and we do a bit of news in the fact they announced a second driver. Took long enough. It wasn't quite at Thanksgiving as we were first told, and then it wasn't at Christmas like we were secondly told. No, that's a lie. It was Halloween as we were first told. Then it was Thanksgiving as we were secondly told. Anyway, we got there midway through February as Roman Grosjean is going to return to IndyCar after a year out with Dale Coyne alongside Dennis Haugen. Now, just to briefly reflect on the news, I think we saw this coming for a little while now. He was at Content Day as people saw, and that was kind of the final indication of realistically he's probably going to be back and gives a bit of a veteran head alongside Dennis Hauger. Interesting to be working at Andretti once again, or an Andretti affiliated team after his situation then a couple of years ago. It didn't quite go to plan, but we saw what Grosjean can do in that exact team when he first joined IndyCar 5 years ago, where he really starred, claiming multiple podiums, and then he did a respectable job at another small team in Juncos a couple of years ago. It was kind of that big team environment where Grosjean didn't quite seem to thrive like we expected him to. So a good opportunity for Grosjean once again to kind of find himself in his IndyCar career, and ultimately the chances of a top driver probably limited at this point, but Grosjean seemed very desperate and very keen to come back to IndyCar, and he's obviously still got a desire to perform and enjoy himself racing in the series.
Yeah, I wasn't sure we were really ever going to see him back in IndyCar after he left JHR. He's obviously, he's getting on. He's not a young driver at all. Obviously, he's had such an esteemed career in F1. And
he turns 40 this year, did Grosjean.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. But then at the same time, he obviously took up that reserve role with Prema last year, which I guess does indicate that he wanted to stay involved. So, yeah, I'm quite excited by this kind of a reignition of the partnership that first put Grosjean on the map in IndyCar in that first year. And I would argue he probably never had a better year in IndyCar, given those 2 years he had with Andretti. He underwhelmed. He obviously had 3 podiums in that 21 season with, what ultimately is probably the series' smallest team or there or thereabouts. So, yeah, looking at now, it's hard to say exactly where he'll pick up from. His year with Juncos was decent without really being exceptional. It wasn't a major improvement at all on what Callum Ilott had done there beforehand. So, yeah, he's a bit of an unknown as well. But he's ultimately got to take the reins as the experienced guy and carry on from where VK left off last year. And it's kind of just mad to think this is his 5th year in IndyCar, which is just.
I don't know if that feels too much or too little in my mind. I guess.
No, I think it feels like quite a lot. I kind of have in my head okay, maybe he's done 3, but obviously, kind of unfortunately the JHR year was a little bit forgettable.
Yes, yeah, very.
And the Andretti years were not forgettable, but they were very turbulent, I would say, is probably the way to put it. Good peaks, but also did, as I say, underwhelm. And
I would like to, I think we said this for Juncos, I think it just hits the pressure of Grosjean a bit, and I think he thrives a lot better when that pressure isn't on. And it'd be good to see him kind of in that environment where he can enjoy his racing. Ultimately, he doesn't have loads of years left in him. So this is a chance for him to really kind of revitalize himself and just enjoy racing again, which I think would be really great for him. And he's going to be a good mentor to Dennis Hauger. Obviously makes his rookie appearance this season. He obviously had a very dominant Indy Next campaign and did what many expected him to do. And he's just the other element of this really interesting Rookie of the Year battle, where he's probably got the best IndyCar-related reputation in the 3, and it's hard to pick a favourite. In my mind, he probably just about sneaks it for me, but he has such a good Indy next season. Obviously, still got that Andretti link, and people are already associating him with the Andretti driver in the future. And obviously, he's spoken to us quite a little bit this off season about kind of his goals for next season. He's been working particularly hard, judging by his gym and Instagram stories and whatever it is, trying to set himself up in the best shape possible. And I think he's a rookie who's going to have really great potential and can be a long-term stay in IndyCar.
Yeah, I mean, it was so impressive how fast he adapted last year, knowing, he didn't know any tracks. He didn't know anything. Like, it was a brand new car, brand new tyres. He didn't know ovals. It was a brand new racing culture, yet first test, and he was on it immediately. And I don't think that was a coincidence. He's obviously a very talented driver. He's an F3 champion, but he also, as you alluded to, has a remarkable work ethic. Like, he spoke to us about the work he did, and like, he was just watching endless amounts of video clips, and like, his gym work is pretty goddamn relentless. So yeah, it all amounts to becoming a dominant champion, and such a dominant champion in his rookie season, in not just Indy Next, but in the US on the IndyCar ladder alone, that Andretti have kind of formed this technical alliance with Dale Coyne Racing to allow them to keep hold of him. And on that front as well, like, looking at the wider team side, you would hope that, okay, while ovals haven't been an exceedingly good thing for Andretti, they can at least help Coyne to improve on what has been a real glaring weakness for them in terms of ovals. I would say Coyne and RLL have been the two teams who have struggled quite significantly on ovals. Obviously, the 500 last year for Coyne was a pretty dismal experience, but I would say the ceiling is pretty high for Hauger. Obviously, VK, obviously, as I've mentioned, showed the potential last year. And yeah, it's just a move that makes so much sense, I think, for Hauger. He can obviously now develop with a team that is renowned for nurturing the young talent.
And that's it for the 25 drivers who we're going to see full-time this season. Obviously, there are 27 spaces in the field, but we don't expect... the Premier situation is unknown. We have no real update since we last told you. It's kind of unknown whether they're going to try and find investment themselves or whether they're going to be bought out. People were saying Dry and Rambo could slot in because they have the resources and infrastructure to do so. But looks like we're going to be, unless barring miracle, we're going to be set at 25% Petersburg. There are 27 spaces at each race by the Indianapolis 500, but we have 33. So there's an opportunity for teams to field an extra car if they wanted to, obviously on a non-chartered basis, whether Prema find a buyer or somebody to buy their equipment and resources, or under a different team name, that is, or whatever. We still don't know, but obviously you find out as the season goes along. Obviously a bit disappointing. Like, we obviously want a field maxed out, and you feel like if it wasn't for the charter situation, we'd probably have 27 cars on the field at St. Petersburg, whether Prema were around or not. But yeah, we'll see what happens to them later on this season. So more news we saw in the last couple of weeks, which we haven't had a chance to mention, we'll bring up now, is IndyCar announcing a multi-year commitment from both Chevrolet and Honda to continue as official equipment manufacturers from the series for 2027 and beyond. Obviously, there was some doubt in the last couple of years whether Honda would recommit to the IndyCar due to the cost involved, and obviously the hybrid project was very, very expensive. But both manufacturers have confirmed they're going to be staying in the series long term and continuing development of the engine in the new car, which is expected in 2028. One of the big news that has come with this is that both manufacturers will have their own chartered entry from 2028 onwards. Honda have already said they're going to be working with Meyer-Shank Racing, as Meyer-Shank Racing for an extra car. Chevrolet are yet to confirm. I'd probably put an early estimate in. We're probably looking at Ed Carpenter Racing. I'd imagine by the time that investment comes in, they'll be a pretty experienced in the team, and they might be looking at expanding. But that's, nobody said that. That's me just trying to put some pieces together. But it's good to see that reaffirmation from Honda and Chevrolet, particularly after the doubts of what the future of the series would look like and the concerns that would be a singular engine manufacturer in the series. It's good that there is a caution that we have two engine manufacturers in the series committed for the growth of IndyCar in the long term.
Yeah, I think it absolutely cannot be understated how important this commitment is. Like, this is a seriously significant piece of news for the future and sustainability of IndyCar, because there was genuine concern that they could be down to one manufacturer with Honda's future in such doubt. So, yeah, I guess just huge kudos to IndyCar, to Doug Bowles, and for everyone involved in getting this deal done. Obviously, giving them charters is an interesting move, but I would say a big part of how this was achieved. I would note that they can only partner with teams that don't already have 3 charters, because you are obviously only allowed 3 charters per team. So the likes of Penske, Ganassi can't be chosen by Honda and Chevy to partner for these charters. But yeah, for the long term, this, what is a multi-year commitment, so greatly improves the stability of IndyCar. And I guess you've got to ask, like, does it provide an attraction for other OEMs as well, a possible third manufacturer? So yeah, just brilliant news, because this seemed like it was in serious doubt.
So there was a test at Phoenix this week, as we said. We got the opportunity to speak to plenty of drivers even before the testing had started.
Yes. So first of all, we had a availability with Pato O'Ward and Álex Palou before the event. So here's just a little bit of a lowdown on what they were kind of planning for this test, what would make a success, and just a couple of other topics as well.
Thanks, Dave. For both of you, I guess what would you come away from these couple of days of testing, kind of seeing as being a success? What are you really kind of wanting to achieve from this test?
What would you call success here this week?
I don't know. Normally at ovals, just about how you feel with the car. If you have confidence to push and to kind of attack the car and be like on top of the car, and not just allowing the car to drive you and take you around. But yeah, I mean, a lot of setup changes. I think normally we don't really have much time to test on ovals. It's only at the IMS that we really have days or hours to do any testing. In all other ovals, we just have like 1 hour before qualifying, and you cannot really test much. So it's exciting, although it's a new track, so we're starting from zero. But at least tomorrow we'll be able to do a lot of changes. So I mean, you always want to go fast, even if you're not like trying to go like quick. You just want to feel fast. But at the same time, it's just a lot easier, I feel, here when it comes to testing, to like get a super big lap compared to when you come here on the race weekend and you only have 2 qualifying laps, and then the race, everybody on the same fuel, just setup and everything. So yeah, I just want to feel confident with the car.
No, I mean, obviously the ovals, you take a bit more of a caution whenever the car isn't really to your liking. You obviously need something that is under you to be able to just be running out there, really. If it's not, then it really is a big delta from one to the other. So I just reiterate what Álex said. You have to be comfortable, you have to be happy with what you have, and this will be a huge opportunity to see the car in every aspect, rather than just, a performance run and then kind of guessing what the car's going to be like in the first stint.
We kind of heard you mentioning about the benefits of having Felix before the 500, but obviously with it being quite a different oval, is there any benefit to having that before the 500 to another oval race to start the season?
The question is there a benefit to have an oval race before the Indianapolis 500 this year? We've both been part of years where there's nothing before the 500, and then, where there is... Indy is Indy. Like, Indy is very different to... Even when we had, like, Texas before Indy, it doesn't fully translate, The Indy just decides what it wants. And obviously the car can be good one day, and then the other day it's like, what's going on with it? So... Indy's its own beast, so I would say it really doesn't have too much of a comparison if we were to start with an oval or not.
And obviously both of you had your new commercials come out now as well, so we see on pretty recently. So just get your reflections on those for this season, your races after.
Your thoughts on the Fox commercials that have come out?
Yeah, I think it's they did a great job once again, especially Powers. I think it's my favorite. I think they nailed it, so yeah, it's good. It's fun. I think they're doing a great job, and I think it's what we've been asking. They delivered last year, and they delivered again this year, so I think it's great.
I do apologise on IndyCar's behalf for the audio not being great there. I think it was a bit of an impromptu setup due to technical issues, so I think the audio was I don't know what it was recorded on, to be honest, but it was coming out of a microphone and a laptop. So, yeah, if the audio is not brilliant, then I apologise on behalf of the series.
So yeah, there wasn't loads to take away from the Phoenix test. Kyle Collette did crash on day one. Marcus Ericsson had some kind of failure on day two, which saw him in the barrier. But otherwise, there's not absolutely tons to report. You look at the timing for yourselves if you're really interested to find out what people came. Me and Archie both did daily reports on the website if you want to read up on what happened on both of the days. And we did get an opportunity to speak to David Malukas after he topped day one of running. And one thing that a lot of drivers alluded to is Phoenix is a strange oval in the fact that the banking in each corner is different, the radius of each corner is different, which is very similar to Worldwide Technology Raceway at Gateway. A lot of people were making the comparisons there. So we actually asked David Malukas about how you kind of approach that from a setup perspective, as well as a couple of other things. So here's David Malukas. Obviously, as you said, it's kind of similar to Gateway in the fact that the two ends of the track are very different in the nature of the corner. So when you approach that, how do you kind of approach the setup of the car? Is it you kind of try and be happy at both? Is it you prioritize one? Does it kind of take a while to kind of find a setup which suits both of the corners the same way?
I think it differs driver to driver. You can get it either set up for 1 and 2 or set it up for 3 and 4 and try to match the difference, or you can try to fight for something in between. And I think that's why I enjoy that game so much, because it's, do you want to find more time in 1 and 2 or find more time in 3 and 4, or maybe try to go in between and be a little bit slower in both, but overall it might be better. And it adds to this game, and I just have a fantastic time. It's like a, I don't know, it's like a big game of chess trying to figure out where do we want the setup. And obviously with all these great minds at Team Penske, it makes it a lot more fun.
And this was something Will said, obviously, when he moved to Andretti, and the fact that there's a lot different, but driving IndyCar is the same. And obviously a lot's been spoken about the move to Penske and the difference in culture there. But when you got into the car, does it still feel like a normal IndyCar, or does it kind of feel different being in a Penske car?
I'd say in general it still feels like an IndyCar. It's since 2024 I've jumped through many teams, it feels like, so I've been able to experience many different feedbacks. And I think, at the end, once you start getting up to things, it's generally all feels like an IndyCar. You're looking at minuscule changes and trying to change your driving style to it, but overall it still feels like an IndyCar.
And obviously Phoenix is race 2 of the season, and compared to previous seasons, we've got much quicker start in races. So how good is it as a driver to kind of have that momentum early on in the season rather than kind of having staggered starts like we have in previous seasons?
Yeah, it feels really good. I was looking at the schedule and seeing that we're going to be going back to back to back. You can build that rhythm, obviously build the interest. I think, we also every year feel like we bring a lot of new people in for IndyCar, and then we always have this big back gap and people are, and we kind of lose that viewership. So I'm very excited from the viewership side to keep the people engaged and see that week after week we're going to be doing these new races. And even for ourselves, we can get into a rhythm really early on and start running through our lists and just building on that confidence, especially now, new team again, having that back to back, it helps a lot.
I guess if we're looking at takeaways, I think how quickly Malukas got up to speed was probably the biggest, alongside obviously Rossi and Ed Carpenter Racing showing their form, because actually on the afternoon session of day 2 it was Rossi from Rasmussen in an ECR 1-2, so that was interesting. But yeah, I just think Malukas, he was relishing the similarities to Gateway, which has obviously been the ground of his biggest successes so far in IndyCar. So I'll definitely be looking at that round 2 of the season as being a possibility for him to get off to a dream start at Penske. Like, obviously no pressure and no panic if he doesn't, but I think the fact that he topped his first kind of official oval test session with full field with the team, pretty impressive stuff. I think just a couple of other notes in terms of takeaways, actually. Will Power logged 259 laps, which was the most of anybody as he continues to get comfortable with Andretti. I'm pretty sure Kyle Kirkwood with 242 laps actually was second as well. So it was a busy day for Andretti, obviously a busy couple of days for Andretti, obviously with the slight downer of Ericsson ending up not too severely in the wall. Ferrucci logged the fewest laps by quite a margin, actually. He logged only 121. The next lowest was Marcus Armstrong on 155. So not entirely sure what happened there. But yeah, they are the kind of biggest takeaways, I would say.
Ultimately, one of the biggest questions is how this track is going to race when we get to it on March 7th. And that was obviously one of the big big findings out of the test for the drivers. So we caught up with Felix Rosenqvist just to ask how he expects the track to race when we go race in March. Judging off the kind of last couple of days, and there was a bit more kind of traffic running done today in comparison to yesterday, do you expect maybe multi-line racing, or do you expect it to be single groove? How do you kind of think the racing is going to be come March?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think probably similar to most short ovals the last 2 years. You know, after we started running the high line, it seems like it could appear in the end of, or like middle to the end of the race. I think when everyone starts on new tires, it's going to be hard to make anything work unless people start running it immediately. But I think as the race goes on and you have people on different strategies, like as I said, if there's a 2-second delta, like you're gonna have so much more speed than other guys. So you pretty much have to make the other line work, especially in 1 and 2. I think 3 and 4, I'm not sure. It's kind of like a 90-degree, so you kind of mess up your radius by going wide. But yeah, I think 1 and 2 will probably be able to.
And considering the weather today, do you feel like you've done all the testing that you need to do? Did the rain kind of stop you doing any more work? So it's already kind of unknown still heading into the race next month?
You always want to do more. In the end, it was kind of messy. We didn't really end up doing half of the stuff we wanted to do, but it's probably the same for everyone. We pushed some of our stuff really late and got kind of screwed by it. But yeah, I think we got plenty of running. 2 days is kind of rare that we're getting. So yeah, we feel pretty happy about our program.
And we got to speak to yet another driver. We've been very busy in the last couple of days. We've got Nolan Siegel just to ask him about the impact that Ryan Hunter-Reay has had at the team at Aaron McLaren so far. He was present at the Phoenix test. Obviously, he's going to be racing Indy 500. Just kind of the support that Ryan Hunter-Reay has provided Nolan Siegel in their early days working together at Aaron McLaren. Tuesday, hi Nolan. You kind of mentioned earlier about Ryan and his impact within the team. Just how much you've been able to tap into his knowledge so far, and kind of what role has he played? And obviously he's driving a world race, but what role is he kind of playing outside of his role doing Indy 500?
Yeah, I actually honestly haven't been able to talk to him as much as I would like. I think he's another great resource, and I'm very lucky to have so many experienced people around me that are so willing to help. So I've had some short conversations with Ryan about just issues I've had here and whether, that's something he's experienced and how he dealt with it. And I think there are some kind of track specific things that are a little different from other places here, and how to drive around those things and what we need to work on. So it's been nice to be able to have those chats with him, and I'm looking forward to talking to him more. And obviously when he gets in the car, it'll be cool to listen to how he goes about things when he's driving as well.
Right. I think that's enough previewing and a bit of the catch up with the news. I think we're all waiting for St. Petersburg now. I mean, there's not too much to preview specifically for St. Petersburg, apart from that we're very much looking forward. But what that does mean, Archie, Fast 6 predictor tournament. Can you believe it? It's been too long.
We're doing that now?
Yes, we always do it now.
Oh, my word. Oh,
we always do it now. Things aren't changing this year. You
flung that upon me because we're going to have our predictions episode before.
I know.
After this.
But this comes in this episode. We can't leave these listeners waiting. They've been waiting 6 months for the Fast 6 predictor tournament.
I'm not in the right headspace. I've been in preview mode.
Well, that's advantage number one for me. Am I the defending champion? I am the defending champion for this. So.
Yeah, we were one apiece last year. I can never remember which one I won and which one you won.
I won Fast 6.
The crown.
So
yeah,
we don't actually know who's participating in Podium Predictor Tournament this year, listeners. So we will contact people this week to see if they want to play along, and you'll find out who's playing along next week. But yes, let's go straight into the Podium Predictor. No, we won't go straight into Podium Predictor Tournament. We'll go straight into the Fast 6 Predictor Tournament and work out our Fast 6 for St. Pete. If you are new to the podcast and don't know what the Fast 6 Predictor Tournament is, myself and Archie, before every race, predict the Fast 6. If it's an over race, we just predict the top 6. That's not very boring. And a one-on-one tournament throughout the year, and we are yet to correctly guess the top 6. Will this year be the year? I hope so. It's been overdue, I think. We've got 2 less drivers to choose from this year. I don't think Schwartzman or Eilert were ever in our top 6 predictions. I don't think that makes a huge difference. But anyway, intriguing this year. So St. Petersburg, round 1. Let's go. Chuck a name out there.
Álex Palou.
Yeah, won't surprise you to see I put him as well. But Álex Palou doesn't typically qualify very well at St. Petersburg, so that's something to bear in mind, considering
He was 8th last year, but I've kind of, the memories are already coming back of how last year we just picked pretty much the same thing, bar 1 or 2, like every race.
Yes, that is true. Okay, let's not hope for the case this year. I'm going to go for last year's pole sitter and Scott McLaughlin as one of mine.
Yep, same, 2 from 2. I'm going to throw Kyle Kirkwood out there.
Okay, so I was considering Kirkwood, but I have not gone for him. So we are at least slightly different to start the year. I'm going for his Andretti teammate, Will Power. He's got 9 poles at St. Petersburg. Andretti good at street courses. I think I can see him getting into the Fast 6 on his Andretti debut.
I can also see that happening.
Okay, wow, right. I'm going to throw in Christian Lundgaard as well into the mix. He was very impressive at St. Petersburg last year, and I can see him doing the same this year.
Okay, that's our first differential then. Lundgaard, yeah, he qualified 5th last year. Fair play. First differential. Lundgaard versus Kirkwood is a big head-to-head.
Yeah, interesting. I'll also throw out Felix Rosenqvist. His qualifying form was always superb to start seasons, and generally that Shank car seems pretty strong on street courses. So Rosenqvist for me.
I'll throw him out as well.
Nice. So we got 1 left each?
Yes, we have.
Oh gosh, so we could go 5 out of 6 the same though.
Yeah, we got a stand-up. Who's saying?
Marcus Armstrong.
David Malukas.
Okay, phew. 4 out of 6. That's different enough to start the season to create some intrigue. That's different enough. So,
okay, so the battles are Malukas against Armstrong and Kirkwood against Lundgaard.
This is Kirkwood. Interesting. All right, we'll see how they get on, and we'll do this throughout the season, which is always very good. It's always very close, which is good as well, which we like to see. But otherwise, I think we're going to leave it there. We're going to see you later this week for our predictions episode. So we won't say properly we'll see you next week at St. Petersburg, because there is one episode before St. Petersburg if all goes to plan. However, we are very much looking forward to race week. It has been far too long. We appreciate all of you who followed throughout the off-season to kind of reach this moment. It's taken us long enough, so we appreciate your patience in getting to this moment.
I guess we should do one last counter, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
so,
sure.
We're recording this episode on Sunday night, at which point the race will already have been, but we'll say 7 days to go, 5 days until cars are on track. And when this drops, it will be 3 days until cars are back on track for practice. Let's go.
Cheers. Yeah, let's go. I can't wait. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that we are at this moment. Like, how was the 6 months just... It's ended. Like it feels like it's ended too abruptly. Like in my mind, it's like we're going to speed again. So I'll prepare a month before, and I've come now, and it's like, ooh, we are here. But anyway,
it's because it hits us this year like a beautiful ton of bricks, because it's such a fast start.
And it means all our episodes in March will be really good, because we don't have to wait 6 months to drag out another 6 episodes of what on earth are we going to do. So anyway, we'll be back next Tuesday for our race review. However, listen in for our predictions episode later this week, because that is always superb fun. But I can't believe we're here. Preview is done. Ready to go racing in St. Petersburg. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.